When my son Daniel got married, I thought my world had finally come full circle. I had raised him alone, through the kind of quiet storms that no one ever really sees. And when he promised that nothing would ever change between us, I believed him. He stood in front of me that night before his wedding, his suit half ironed, his tie hanging loose around his neck. "Mom," he said, with that same gentle look he'd had since he was a boy, "no matter what happens after tomorrow, I'll always be your son first." I smiled. I wanted to believe that love could stay untouched by time, by people, by life. I wanted to believe that a son's heart didn't have room for distance, that what we built together all those years couldn't fade. But promises, even the sweetest ones, sometimes melt quietly like morning frost. It didn't happen all at once. There was no big fight, no sharp goodbye, just a slow drift, a space that widened between us so gently that at first I didn't even notice it was there. I remember the first time I realized I wasn't part of his new world anymore. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind we used to spend watching old movies or trying new recipes together. I had baked his favorite pie, apple, the one with the cinnamon crust, and called to tell him to stop by. He hesitated. I heard voices in the background. Then he said softly, "Maybe another day, Mom. We've got plans with her parents." That moment stayed with me, not because of what he said, but because of the way he said it, careful, almost apologetic. Like he already knew something in our rhythm had changed. I told myself it was just life. People grow, things shift. But at night, when the house went quiet, I'd find myself sitting by the window, staring at the porch light that I still left on for him, even though he didn't need it anymore. That's the thing about motherhood. You never really stop waiting, even when you know no one's coming. Daniel was my whole world long before he ever took his first breath. I was 24 when I found out I was pregnant. His father, Mark, was already halfway out the door by then, chasing his own dreams somewhere far beyond the small town we called home. When I told him about the baby, he just stood there, quiet, hands shoved deep into his pockets. Then he said, "You'll be fine without me." And so I was. I didn't have much, but I had purpose. I worked 2 jobs, mornings at the diner, nights cleaning offices, and in between, I carried Daniel with me everywhere I went. I used to hum little songs while wiping tables, my hand resting on my stomach, whispering to him that someday everything would be better. When he was born, the nurse placed him in my arms and said, "He's got your eyes." And in that instant, I promised him something that I never said out loud, that I would never make him feel the kind of loneliness I had known all my life. Our home was small, but it was filled with laughter. Mornings smelled like pancakes and the sound of his giggles. Nights were softer, stories under dim light, his head resting on my shoulder as I read to him. When other kids brought both parents to school events, Daniel always looked for me in the crowd. He'd wave like I was the most important person in the world, and maybe to him I was. He grew up fast, too fast it sometimes felt. He had this quiet determination in him, a mix of kindness and ambition that reminded me of the man his father could have been, if only he'd stayed. But Daniel was better than that. He had empathy. He had heart. When I couldn't afford something, he'd say, "It's okay. Mom, we don't need it." When I came home tired, he'd heat up leftovers and make me sit down before he served me dinner. Once, when he was 10, he said, "When I grow up, I'm going to buy you a big house with a porch and rocking chairs so you can rest." That memory still warms me and hurts me all at once. As he got older, our bond deepened. We weren't just mother and son. We were a team. We'd go grocery shopping together, plan his school projects side by side, laugh over burnt dinners and broken light bulbs. Life was never fancy, but it was full. When he got into college, I cried harder than I expected. Not because I was sad, but because I was proud. I worked overtime just to afford his textbooks and bus fare. And when he'd call me late at night, talking about his new life, I'd listen to every detail like it was a bedtime story just for me. He'd always end those calls the same way. "I love you. Mom, I'll never forget everything you've done for me." And I'd reply, "You never could, sweetheart." I believed it. Years passed, and Daniel became the kind of man I always hoped he'd be. Gentle, hardworking, thoughtful. He got a good job in the city after college. I remember the day he came home to tell me. He held out the offer letter with that wide, boyish grin. "Mom, we made it." He said, "we, not I." That small word meant everything. I hugged him and said, "I told you, good things come to good people." For a while, nothing changed between us. He'd visit every weekend, sometimes bringing groceries, sometimes just to sit and talk. We'd watch the old movies we used to love, the black and white ones where love was slow and gentle. He'd laugh at the same lines even though he'd heard them 100 times. But then came the day he told me he'd met someone. Her name was Emily. The first time I heard her name, I smiled. I wanted to be happy for him. That's what mothers do, after all. We celebrate our children's joy, even if we feel a small pang of something else underneath. He described her like she was light itself. "She's kind, Mom. You'll love her." And I did, or at least I wanted to. When he brought Emily over for dinner, she was polite and sweet. She brought flowers and helped me set the table. But there was something in her eyes, not unkindness, just distance. Like she wasn't quite sure where I fit in Daniel's world. I brushed it off. Maybe she was just nervous. After they left that night, I remember washing the dishes and thinking, my boy's growing up. He's building his own life now. I told myself I was ready for that, but part of me, the quiet part that only speaks in the dark, knew that love changes shape. Sometimes it stretches. Sometimes it slips away before you even notice. Still, I tried to hold on. I told him, "Daniel, no matter where life takes you, promise me one thing." He looked up, smiling softly. "What's that, Mom?" "Promise me you won't forget the little things. Our talks, our Sundays, the things that made us, us." He took my hand and said, "I promise." And I believed him. At first, nothing seemed different. Daniel still called, still visited, still laughed the same way he always did. But the spaces between those moments grew longer. When he and Emily got engaged, I was overjoyed. I remember standing in my tiny kitchen, holding the phone as he told me the news, my eyes filling with tears that were half joy, half disbelief. "Mom," he said, "I asked her to marry me." She said yes. I leaned against the counter and whispered, "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful." He told me they were thinking of a spring wedding. He wanted something simple, elegant, just close family and friends. I started picturing the day in my mind, the flowers, the vows, the look on his face as he stood at the altar. "Don't worry," he added quickly. "You'll sit right in the front row." I smiled through the tears. "Of course I will. Where else would I be?" The weeks passed in a blur of wedding plans. I tried to help, offering to sew small details or bake for the rehearsal dinner. But Emily's mother had already taken care of most things. I didn't mind. At least, that's what I told myself. I wanted to be supportive, to give Emily space to feel like she belonged. Still, every now and then, I caught glimpses of something in Daniel's tone, a hesitance, a shift. "Mom, maybe you don't need to worry about that," he'd say gently. Or, "Emily's mom already has it covered. But thank you." I'd nod and say, "Of course, honey." But afterward, the silence in my house felt heavier than before. The night before the wedding, he stopped by to drop off something. A pair of cufflinks I'd given him when he graduated college. "I'm wearing these tomorrow," he said. "For luck," I smiled, touched by the gesture. "Your father would be proud of you." He looked down, then back at me. "I hope so. And I'm proud of you, Mom. Everything I am. It's because of you." That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying those words, feeling like maybe, just maybe, I hadn't lost him to the world after all. But then the wedding came. It was beautiful. A soft morning under a pale blue sky. Emily looked radiant, and Daniel's eyes shone when he saw her walking down the aisle. I sat in the front row, just as he promised, and for a brief moment I felt like everything was right again. After the ceremony, during the reception, Emily's family took photos, smiling, laughing, embracing. Daniel came over, kissed my forehead, and said, "Mom, thank you for being here." I nodded. Where else would I be, sweetheart? He smiled, but someone called his name. And just like that, he was gone again, swept away into a crowd of new faces and new beginnings. That was the first time I felt truly invisible. After the wedding, things changed faster than I expected. He and Emily moved to the city about 2 hours away. Not far, really, but far enough. At first, he'd call once or twice a week. Then it became once every 2 weeks. Then once a month, when I called him, sometimes he'd answer right away, his voice tired but warm. Hey, Mom, sorry, work's been crazy. Or, Emily's parents are visiting, can I call you later? And sometimes he didn't call back. I'd tell myself not to take it personally. He was building his life. He was busy. But there were nights when I'd sit at the kitchen table, his favorite coffee mug still in the cupboard, untouched since his last visit. I'd find myself whispering, "You used to call me just to tell me about the rain." One afternoon, I decided to surprise them. I baked a pie, his favorite again, and drove into the city. It was a sunny Saturday, and the streets were full of life. I found their apartment, took a deep breath, and knocked on the door. When Emily opened it, she looked startled. "Oh, Mrs. Carter." "Hi." Her tone wasn't unkind, but there was hesitation. "I was in the area," I said quickly, holding up the pie. "Thought I'd drop this off for Daniel." "Oh, he's actually not here," she said, glancing back inside. "He had to work late. You could have called first." Her words stung, though she didn't mean them cruelly. "I didn't want to bother him," I replied softly. She forced a polite smile. "That's thoughtful. I'll let him know you stopped by." I stood there for a moment longer, not sure what else to say. The pie felt heavier in my hands than it should have. "Would you like to come in for a minute?" she added quickly, almost out of obligation. I smiled and shook my head. "No, dear, I should be going. Just tell him I love him." The drive home felt longer than the drive there. That night, Daniel called. "Mom, I heard you came by. You should have told me. I would have made time." "I didn't want to intrude," I said. He sighed. "You're never intruding. It's just, things have been busy. You know how it is?" "I do," I said quietly. "I used to be busy too." There was a pause, and then we both changed the subject. But I could feel the distance between us growing like a wall, one neither of us knew how to climb. Holidays came and went. Thanksgiving, Christmas. Sometimes he'd visit for a day, sometimes just send a card. One Christmas, I wrapped a sweater for him, navy blue, his favorite color, and waited by the window. Snow fell softly outside. The clock ticked past 8, then 9. Finally, my phone buzzed. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Emily's family came into town last minute. We'll stop by next weekend, I promise." I stared at the blinking light on my phone. "Next weekend," I repeated, more to myself than to him. I hung up and looked at the untouched dinner table, 2 plates, 2 glasses, 1 candle flickering in the middle. I blew it out and whispered, "Merry Christmas, sweetheart." That was the night I stopped setting 2 plates. I never blamed Emily. She wasn't cruel. She was just protective of her space, her time, her family. Maybe she didn't understand that my whole world was built around Daniel, that his laughter filled every quiet corner of my life. And I suppose Daniel didn't understand that when he built a new life. I had nowhere else to build mine. The house started to feel emptier. The phone rang less. The porch light stayed on longer. I filled my days with small routines, morning walks, church on Sundays, phone calls with old friends. I learned to live around the silence. But there were moments, fleeting and sharp, when I'd open the window and swear I could still hear his voice calling, "Mom, come look at this." That's the thing about love. It doesn't vanish when someone walks away. It lingers in the quiet, in the spaces they used to fill. It happened on a Sunday in early autumn, the kind of day that carries both warmth and melancholy in the air. The sun was gentle, the leaves turning shades of amber and gold. I was sweeping the porch when my phone buzzed. It was Daniel. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice lighter than I'd heard in months. "Guess what? You're going to be a grandma." For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. My heart lifted, high, bright, alive again. "Oh, Daniel, that's wonderful. How's Emily feeling?" "She's doing okay. Tired mostly, but happy." "I'm so happy too," I whispered. "I can't wait to meet the baby." he chuckled softly. We're still early, but I wanted you to be the first to know. Those words, the first to know, melted something inside me. Maybe things would change now. Maybe I'd finally be part of his world again. We talked a little longer, about names, about cravings, about the nursery they were planning to paint. When we hung up, I stood on the porch, staring out at the trees, feeling a quiet joy bloom in my chest. For weeks, I let myself dream again. I started knitting a tiny blanket, yellow because I didn't know the gender yet. I bought picture frames, imagining where I'd place the first photo of my grandchild. But as the months went on, the distance returned, not cruel, just consistent. I learned most updates through social media. Pictures of Emily's baby shower, photos of them smiling, surrounded by her family. I wasn't there. No one had invited me. When I asked Daniel about it, he said, "Oh, Mom, it was mostly Emily's friends and her side of the family. We'll have a small get-together later, I promise." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Of course. That makes sense. But that night, as I sat in my quiet living room, I found myself folding the little yellow blanket over and over, my hands trembling. When the baby was born, a little girl named Lily, I waited by the phone all day. He texted around midnight. She's here. 7 pounds, healthy. Emily's resting. I'll call you tomorrow. I stared at the message until the words blurred. He didn't send a picture. The next morning, I baked a batch of muffins and packed a small basket of gifts, soft toys, the blanket, a card. I drove 2 hours to the hospital, my heart beating fast the whole way. When I arrived, a nurse told me only immediate family were allowed inside at that time. "I'm her husband's mother," I said quickly. "I just want to drop this off." The nurse smiled kindly and took the basket. "I'll make sure they get it." I thanked her, and as I turned to leave, I saw Daniel down the hallway, holding the baby, Emily beside him. They looked beautiful together, glowing, complete. He didn't see me. I stood there for a few seconds, frozen. Then I walked quietly back to my car. That was the first time I felt like a ghost in his life, present but unseen. The following week, Daniel finally called. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he said. "Things have been hectic. You know how it is with a newborn." "I understand," I replied softly. "How's little Lily?" "She's perfect. You'll meet her soon, I promise." "Take your time," I said. "I know you're both busy," but after we hung up, I whispered to the empty room, "You don't need to promise me anymore." A few months later, he invited me to visit. It was a cold February afternoon, and I was both nervous and excited. I spent hours choosing a simple outfit, wrapping a gift for Lily, and baking Daniel's favorite cookies. When I arrived, Emily greeted me politely but distractedly. Lily was asleep in her arms, tiny, perfect, with a tuft of soft brown hair. "Can I hold her?" I asked, smiling. Emily hesitated just long enough for me to notice. Then she nodded and carefully passed the baby over. The moment I held her, my heart melted. Lily's fingers wrapped around mine, and I felt a warmth that went deeper than words. "Hello, sweetheart," I whispered. "I'm your grandma." She stirred slightly, made a soft sound, and then drifted back to sleep. Daniel smiled from across the room, tired but happy. "She likes you already," I smiled back. "I like her too." For a few moments, everything felt right again. But as the day went on, I started noticing small things. Not cruel, just quiet. The way Emily subtly guided every conversation. The way Daniel's eyes darted toward her before answering certain questions. The way I felt like a guest rather than family. When I stood to leave, I said softly, "Thank you for having me." "She's beautiful, Daniel. You've both made something truly wonderful." He hugged me, quick and distracted. "Drive safe, okay?" I nodded and stepped out into the cold evening. As I drove home, the streetlights blurred through my tears. It wasn't sadness alone, it was understanding. The kind that sits heavy in your chest because it finally makes sense. A few weeks later, I received an invitation. Lily's first birthday party. The envelope had a printed card inside, the the same as all the other guests. I smiled when I saw it, but my heart ached a little too. On the day of the party, I dressed nicely, brought a small gift, and arrived right on time. The house was full of laughter and balloons. Emily's family was everywhere, her parents, her sisters, cousins, friends. Daniel saw me and smiled. "Mom, you made it." "Of course I did," I said softly. He hugged me quickly. Then someone called his name again, and he was gone. I sat quietly in the corner, watching as Lily smashed cake between her tiny hands, laughing as everyone cheered. I clapped and smiled, but deep down, I felt like I was watching through glass. After the candles were blown out and the gifts were opened, I helped clean up a little. Emily thanked me politely. "You didn't have to, Mrs. Carter." "I wanted to," I said. When I left, Daniel walked me to the door. "Thanks for coming, Mom. I know it's been busy lately." I nodded. "I know, sweetheart. I just hope you're happy." He looked at me, really looked, and said, "I am." And I realized then that maybe happiness didn't always include me. That night, I sat on my porch again, the same spot where I'd waited for his calls years ago. I looked at the sky, at the faint stars, and whispered, "You kept your promise as long as you could." It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sorrow anymore. It was acceptance, gentle, painful, but real. Sometimes love fades, not because it dies, but because it changes form. It becomes quieter, like the soft hum of a memory that refuses to disappear. The weeks after Lily's first birthday felt strangely still. There were no more invitations, no more calls, just quiet. At first I told myself they were busy, that it was normal for new parents to lose track of time. But as the days turned into months, I stopped waiting by the phone. I began to fill my days differently. I started volunteering at the local library, helping children pick out books and reading stories aloud during afternoon sessions. Their laughter filled the air, light and unfiltered. Some of them reminded me of Daniel when he was little, the way he'd wrinkle his nose when something made him happy, or how his eyes would brighten when I read his favorite story. One day, a little boy tugged on my sleeve and said, "Miss, you sound like my grandma." I smiled softly and said, "That's the nicest thing anyone's told me today." It was a small moment, but it stayed with me. Because in that moment, I realized something important. Love doesn't end when someone leaves. It finds new paths, new hearts to rest in. As spring came, the world outside began to bloom again. I took morning walks around the neighborhood, waving to neighbors, stopping to admire the gardens that lined the street. The air smelled of lilacs and rain. Sometimes, when I passed by families laughing together, I'd feel that familiar ache again. But it wasn't sharp anymore. It was softer, a reminder of something beautiful that had once been mine. I still had Daniel's old room just as it was. His baseball glove on the shelf, his high school trophies gathering dust, the faded posters on the wall. I used to come in there just to sit and feel close to him. But one afternoon, I finally decided to let go. I packed his things gently, not out of bitterness, but love. I folded the old shirts, the childhood drawings, the souvenirs from family trips. Each item carried a story. As I packed, I whispered softly, "You don't need these things to remember me, Daniel. You carry me with you already." I placed everything neatly in a box and stored it in the attic. The room looked emptier afterward, but somehow lighter too. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in a long time. Months passed quietly. One morning, I was watering the small garden behind my house when the phone rang. It was Daniel. "Hey, Mom," he said, his voice hesitant. "How are you?" "I'm good," I replied calmly. "How are you, sweetheart?" "We're okay," he said. "Emily's been busy with work, and Lily's growing fast." "She started walking." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "That's wonderful, Daniel." "I'm proud of her already," he paused. "Mom, I know I haven't been around much." "It's all right," I said gently. "You have a family now. That's how it's supposed to be." "But I miss you," he admitted quietly. "Sometimes I feel like I'm failing you." Those words surprised me. I leaned against the counter and took a slow breath. "You're not failing me, Daniel. You're living your life. That's what every mother hopes for her child." "I just wish I could balance it better," he said. I smiled softly. Life has its seasons, sweetheart. When you were little, I was your whole world. Now you have your own. It doesn't mean you love me less. It just means you're growing, and I'm proud of that. There was silence on the line for a few seconds. The kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Thank you. Mom, he whispered. Always, I replied. And Daniel? Give Lily a kiss from me. I will. When we hung up, I sat quietly for a while, letting the warmth of that short call fill me. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That summer, Daniel visited with Lily for the first time in nearly a year. I remember the sound of their car pulling into the driveway, the way my heart raced as I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Lily ran toward me, tiny arms stretched out. "Grandma!" she said, her voice high and bright. I knelt down, tears springing to my eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, look at you." She threw her little arms around my neck, and for that moment, the distance of years disappeared. Daniel stood at the door, smiling sheepishly. "Sorry it took me so long," I shook my head. "You're here now. That's all that matters." We spent the afternoon together, playing in the yard, eating lunch under the old maple tree, laughing as Lily chased butterflies. For the first time in a long time, it felt like family again. When Daniel went inside to take a phone call, Lily tugged at my hand. "Grandma, can I pick a flower?" "Of course, baby," I said, guiding her to the garden. She picked a small yellow daisy and handed it to me. "For you," she said proudly. I smiled, my throat tightening. "Thank you, sweetheart." "It's beautiful," she smiled back. And in that simple gesture, I felt the bridge between us rebuilding, one petal at a time. Later that evening, as the sky turned pink and gold, Daniel sat with me on the porch. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I've hurt you." I shook my head. "You've just been living your life, Daniel. I never wanted to hold you back," he sighed. "When Dad left, you gave up so much for me. I guess I didn't realize how much until now." I looked at him, at the man he'd become, sitting there with that same thoughtful look he had as a boy. "I didn't give up anything. I gained you. And now I get to see you give that same love to your daughter." He turned to me, eyes soft. "I don't deserve you," I smiled gently. "Of course you do. Every child deserves a mother's love, even when they walk away for a while." We sat there in silence after that, listening to the crickets and the faint hum of the evening breeze. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. There were no tears, no big apologies, just quiet understanding. And that, I realized, was enough. As the days passed, Daniel started calling more often. Sometimes just for a few minutes, sometimes longer. He'd tell me about Lily's new words, Emily's new job, their weekend trips. I listened to every story with a smile. I no longer waited by the phone. But when it rang, I felt joy instead of longing. I learned that love, when freed from expectation, becomes something purer, something that asks for nothing, yet gives everything. One morning, as I sat on my porch sipping coffee, Lily's laughter echoed from the yard where Daniel was playing with her. The sunlight danced across the grass, and I felt something warm settle inside me. Peace. For years, I had been holding on to the pain of being left behind. But now I understood it wasn't abandonment. It was life moving forward. We raise our children to grow, to love, to live fully. And sometimes that means they walk away for a while. But the bond remains, quiet and unbroken, like the roots of a tree that still feed the branches even when they grow far apart. When they left that evening, Lily hugged me tightly. "I love you, Grandma." "I love you too, my darling," I whispered. Daniel kissed my forehead before getting into the car. "See you soon, Mom." As their car disappeared down the road, I didn't feel emptiness this time. I felt full, of love, of gratitude, of peace. Because finally I had learned that motherhood doesn't end when your child grows up. It simply changes shape, and maybe that's the quiet promise every mother carries. Not that our children will always stay, but that our love will. Always. It's strange how the heart heals, not all at once, but gently, like morning light seeping through the cracks of a dark room. For a long time, I believed that being a mother meant holding on, That love was about staying close, making sure your child never felt alone. But I've come to understand something else. Sometimes, love is about letting go, quietly and without resentment, so they can find their own place in the world. When Daniel first drifted away, I thought I'd lost him forever. I thought all those years, the sleepless nights, the birthday cakes, the small sacrifices, had faded into nothing. But now I see it differently. Those years built the foundation that lets him stand tall today. Every lesson I whispered, every hug I gave, every prayer I said when times were hard, they're part of him, even if I'm not there to see it every day. That's the unspoken truth of motherhood. You give everything you have, knowing you'll eventually have to step back and watch from a distance. Sometimes, I still walk through the quiet house and think of those years when it was just the two of us. I can still picture Daniel at 10 years old, sitting at the kitchen table, legs swinging under the chair, telling me about his day at school while I stirred a pot of soup. The smell of tomato and basil would fill the air, and he'd sneak in a piece of bread before dinner, grinning when I pretended not to notice. Those memories are like photographs in my heart, still, warm and forever safe. I've learned to stop wishing for time to go backward. Instead, I'm thankful for what was, and for what still is, even in its new form. Now when the phone rings and I hear his voice say, "Hi, Mom," there's no ache, no tension, just peace. Sometimes he calls because he needs advice. Other times he just wants to talk while driving home from work. And every call, every small moment feels like a quiet gift. A few weeks ago, Daniel sent me a picture of Lily on her first day of preschool. She was standing there with her tiny backpack, grinning from ear to ear, her hair tied up in 2 little ponytails. Under the picture, he'd written, "She reminds me of you." I stared at that message for a long time before replying. That's the best thing you could have ever said to me. Because in that one line, I realized that I hadn't disappeared from his life. I had simply become part of the fabric of the next generation, woven quietly, invisibly, but always there. On quiet evenings, I sit on the porch as the sun sets. The sky turns soft shades of pink and orange, the same colors Daniel loved to paint when he was a boy. The wind rustles through the trees, and the world feels calm, as if whispering that everything, even heartbreak, eventually finds its peace. I take a deep breath and smile to myself. Life has a way of teaching us, even when we don't want to, learn. It teaches patience through waiting. It teaches forgiveness through pain, and it teaches love, true love, through letting go. Someone had told me years ago that I'd find peace after Daniel walked away. I wouldn't have believed them. But now I know. Sometimes distance doesn't mean the end of love. It simply changes how love shows itself. And when you stop trying to hold it so tightly, it has room to grow again. So yes, I raised him alone. And yes, he walked away for a time, but he came back in his own way. Not as my little boy, but as a man who still carries my heart in his own. That's enough for me. Because in the end, being a mother isn't about keeping your children close. It's about giving them the strength to walk away and the comfort to know they can always come home. If you've ever loved someone enough to let them go, you already understand what it means to forgive, to endure, and to love without limits. That's what motherhood truly is.